Hello, my name is Cameron Toth, and I'm here to provide a brief review and reflection on the young adult text titled Inside Out by Terry Trueman. First, I would like to provide a brief synopsis of the novel itself. The main character of the story is a 16-year-old boy named Zachary M. Wasted. However, for the majority of the book, he simply goes by Zach. Dr. Curtis, a psychiatrist, diagnoses Zach with schizophrenia and also mentions that he is a paranoid type. Most of Zach's paranoia stems from the fact that he believes two men named Dirtbag and Rag are out to get him. If his mom doesn't regularly give him his medication, he has a harder time controlling this part of his schizophrenia and will have a harder time keeping Dirtbag and Rat from visiting him. Throughout the novel, he constantly mentions these two and worries that they will find him while he is most vulnerable. What really jumpstarts the conflict of this novel happens at the end of the very first chapter. Two boys who go by the aliases of Frosty and Stormy, but in reality are named Alan and Joey, hold up the coffee shop where Zach is waiting for his mom to pick him up at. It quickly turns into a hostage situation where the police get involved and Zach, along with about 8 other victims, are kept inside the coffee shop. This proves to be an even bigger problem for Zach, who is relying on meeting his mom soon in order to get his medication. Zach is the one who unintentionally keeps everyone alive throughout the novel's entirety. Because of his condition, he has a problem discerning reality from his own imagination, and seems to lack a true understanding of the gravity of their situation. But despite all this, he still proves to be a great help. First, he convinces Alan and Joey to let all the other hostages go if he agrees to stay. Then, he begins to uncover the humanity within Alan and Joey, finds out they are brothers, and understands a little bit more about their story, and in turn we get to know more. The two brothers attempted this holdup in the first place to help pay their mother's medical bills. Also, Zach is the one who suggests that they call his psychiatrist to confirm that the deal Alan and Joey made with the police that will allow them to be tried as juveniles as opposed to adults is official. If it weren't for Zach being there, the hostages wouldn't have been able to leave. Alan and Joey might have only been viewed as evil villains to us as readers. They also might have received an even worse sentencing, and the whole situation wouldn't have been resolved. The real tragedy of the story is the fact that after everything Zach goes through, he doesn't get his own happy ending. The last chapter of the novel is a news article a month later talking about the events that happened at the coffee shop. Zach is painted as the hero of the story, but then readers find out in just a couple of sentences that Zach killed himself. Overall, this book is one that tells a thrilling tale while also showing the tragic parts of Zach's life while alive and also in his death. The formatting throughout the story is also very interesting to look at. Each chapter, don't worry, you don't have to read those all, but those are some of the examples. But each chapter in the novel begins with little paragraphs that are either notes or letters, with either Dr. Curtis or Zach's mom being the authors of them. I included all the examples and what page numbers they can be found on, some of which include Doctor's notes on Zach and also Zach's mom's letters to Dr. Curtis. Another interesting part of the formatting is the small faint words at the bottom of each of the pages, usually near the beginning of the chapters. What's interesting about this choice is that the words at the bottom are snippets of the reoccurring words that the voices in Zach's head say to him. It is almost like Trueman is trying to show his readers exactly what it is like to live inside Zach's head. Just like he can't control when those voices come and go, the reader can't control when those words show up. There are many examples of this, but here are just a few I took from pictures of my own book. Here's one on page 3, another on page 43, and another on page 71. There are two connections that I wanted to note, or more specifically, a text-to-text and a text-to-world connection. Let's first discuss the text-to-text connection. I noticed when I was looking through some of Trueman's other novels that a couple of his other stories also deal with the subject of disabilities. For example, his novel Stuck in Neutral and its sequel Life Happens Next both feature a young boy named Sean McDaniel with cerebral palsy. I thought this was an interesting detail revolving around the author. The other connection that I wanted to make was a text-to-world. More specifically, I wanted to connect Zach's behavior to what we know about schizophrenia outside the novel itself. In an article titled Schizophrenia, the National Institute of Mental Health says that schizophrenia can somehow, quote, affect how a person thinks, feels, and behaves, end quote, as well as, quote, make it difficult to participate in everyday activities, end quote. We see a lot of these traits in Zach. When he is put into the hostage situation at the coffee shop, he doesn't really grasp the true reality of the situation, as I mentioned before. And he says and does things without meaning to that get him in trouble. For example, on page 10, when they are being moved to the back of the coffee shop to get out of range from the police, Zach can only focus on the maple bars on the counter. Instead of focusing on his safety in this moment, he instead chooses to think about eating the food. And he voices this one of his, and the Alan and Joey kind of think he's like messing with him, and he's not. That's just like what he wants to think about. The next question I want to answer is whether or not this novel is appropriate for young adult readers. While I do think that the story is appropriate despite dealing with heavy themes, I think it is also important to make readers aware before they start to read about some of the more touchy parts of the story. For example, if I was a teacher assigning this text, I would let them know ahead of time about the discussion of suicide and offensive language used throughout the novel. As I mentioned, teachers should definitely let their students know about the discussion of suicidal topics ahead of time, especially since it revolves solely around the novel's main character, Zach. An article titled "5 Things Educators Should Know When Talking About Suicide" states that talking about suicide in the classroom opens up a conversation to students that allows them to feel seen or heard if they themselves are experiencing thoughts that might lead them to take their own life. For that reason, I think the novel is important because it touches upon the subject and opens up that conversation for students. But warning students ahead of time gives them a chance to decline the reading if it is a subject that is too sensitive for them to read about. Another part of the story that I think students should be warned about ahead of time would be Joey's use of the R word towards Zach. Just like the discussion of suicide, teachers should probably give their students a heads up about the use of the word in the novel because of the ways it is used as an insult towards Zach. The next question I want to answer is how this novel is appealing to young adult readers. For starters, oh sorry. For starters, I think this novel could appeal to a wide range of audiences for the sole reason of Zach being a likable character. He doesn't let the harmful language Joey uses go unnoticed and corrects him many times. The quotes provided are just 2 examples of the times Zach has been forced to defend himself. While this describes an appeal to all age groups, it is important to consider the appeal to young adult text given that this is the audience the novel is written for. So moving on, building off of that point, according to Erik Erikson, the psychosocial stage that adolescents are experiencing during this age is the stage of identity versus role confusion. During this stage, young adults are, quote, searching for a sense of self and personal identity, end quote. This is seen through Zach and the brother duo of Alan and Joey. Zach is someone who is constantly fighting his schizophrenia and is in a constant battle of discerning what is real or not real. He struggles to think of himself outside of this, and in moments where he stands up for himself, we are able to see him define himself in ways that are separate from his disabilities. And we can even see that in the first 2 quotes where he says, "No, I'm smart," or "No, my brain works differently." He's standing up for himself. Also, we see much of the role confusion part of Erikson's psychosocial stage through Alan and Joey. They are also facing an internal battle within themselves, but unlike Zach, it involves their mother. After revealing to Zach that they are trying to rob the coffee shop in order to get money to help pay their mother's medical bills, the readers are able to understand a little more about these characters. They are trying to find a place between being good sons to their mother while also trying to fight against the constraints of being a law-abiding citizen. In the end, they are able to find a role in both while showing that their mother that they are willing to do anything to support her while also turning themselves in at the end of the story because they believe that is the right thing for them to do. Finally, one of the more appealing aspects of the novel is its inclusion of a character with a disability. This promotes things like awareness and representation that are sometimes lacking in other stories. It is also important to consider how this inclusion is achieved. The article titled "Redefining Normal: A Critical Analysis of Disability in Young Adult Literature" talks about how it is good to have students read stories where characters with disabilities are not overly emphasized as they are in Inside Out, but it is also sometimes important to do the opposite in order to lead to a, quote, more critical discourse analysis. This basically means that having a character's disability be highlighted or focused on in the story gives the reader a chance to approach that disability from many different angles. They are able to look at how it affects the character specifically and what is being said about it in general. I believe that this chance for analysis that a novel provides would definitely appeal to young adult readers. Thank you for listening to my brief overview of Terry Trueman's young adult novel, Inside Out. I hope that I was successful in providing both a summary and an analysis of the novel's story. Here is my reference list if you want to check out the sources I referenced throughout the presentation, and thank you again for listening.